Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to speak to you today. People with autism navigate life differently. Some have particular health needs too. This is why it is so important to ensure early and better diagnosis, as well as early intervention services. This importance is reflected in my mission letter as well. The European Commission has initiated a European strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities. One of its goals is to improve access to healthcare that is accessible and centered around each person and their specific needs. In the realm of my responsibility as Commissioner, the health policy, we have a number of initiatives working towards these goals. First, by bringing together the expertise we have. One of our European reference networks is doing this in the field of autism. We have been providing continuously significant funding to these networks since 2017. The reference networks are unique because they allow the expertise to travel rather than the patients. Second, the EU finances research like the AIMS2 trials project, which received 55 million euros from the EU Innovative Medicines Initiative, a partnership between the EU and the life sciences industry. The AIM2 trials is an international research program to improve health outcomes for people with autism. Looking ahead to the future, we can and we have to do much more. For instance, harnessing via the Biotech Act in 2026, the power of biotechnology to turn cutting-edge research into new products and treatments. Another big cornerstone for the future of healthcare is the European Health Data Space. It allows to have access of your health data in an electronic format, wherever you are in Europe. This will mean for patients faster diagnosis, continuity of care in emergency situations, and better coordination between healthcare providers. The European Health Data Space will also significantly accelerate research and innovation in healthcare. Think of early diagnosis of autism through better biomarkers, AI-powered tools, and personalized therapy plans for people living with autism. Autism is a lifelong reality for many people and their families. It requires comprehensive and enduring approaches. We are dedicated to improving their and their families' lives. In the European Union, everyone should be included, no matter where they live, no matter their condition or disability. With this, I wish you a successful event. Thank you for your attention.
I would like to thank for proposing us to organize this important event to celebrate World Autism Awareness Day, which took place on 2 April. World Autism Awareness Day is a day that invites us to reflect, learn and act. People with autism do not need our compassion, they need our commitment. Autism or autism spectrum disorder affects millions of people around the world. Each person with autism is unique, with their own strengths, challenges, and ways of seeing the world. And it is precisely this diversity that enriches us. It's essential to remember that awareness raising is not only about recognizing the difficulties faced by people with autism, but also about recognizing and valuing their talents, abilities, and contributions to our society. I want to emphasize these people with autism and their families face daily barriers that limit their access to education, employment, and healthcare especially. These barriers are not inevitable. They are the result of a lack of understanding and adaptation in our social structures. Today, more than ever, we must commit ourselves to, first of all, early detection and universal access to appropriate diagnosis and treatment. Every day counts in the life of a person with autism, and every intervention can make a significant difference. Strengthening inclusive education systems. It's not enough to integrate. We must transform classrooms and schools' environments so that they are truly accessible and respect the needs of every student. It's very important. The inclusive education is not only stay in the classroom, it's the adaptation in the classroom for the special collectivity of autism. Support for families. Careers needs resource, guidance, and emotional support. Inclusion in the laboral market. People with autism have talents and abilities that, if recognized and valued, can contribute enormously to social and economic development. Social awareness, combating stigma and prejudice, is key to building a society that not only tolerates but celebrates diversity. But words are not enough. We in this Parliament must commit ourselves with legislation that guarantees equal opportunities, with sufficient budgets to ensure the implementation of inclusive programs, and with a firm commitment to work for a society that leaves no one behind. Today, more than ever, I invite you to join this effort. Let's make World Autism Day a turning point, a moment to reaffirm that every person has the right to be heard, respected, and valued. Because inclusion is an act of justice. And together we can build a world where diversity is our greatest strength. Because autism does not separate us. It teaches us to look at the world from another perspective. Diversity enriches us, and inclusion makes us stronger as a society. Let us remember that people with autism not only have challenges, they also have talents and much to contribute. For them and with them, let us move towards a society where no one is left behind. We have different objectives. One of them is in education. The education is very important. There is a high school dropout rate among people with disabilities, 18% points above the rate for the general population. The reasons are a lot of reasons, but lack of curricular adaptations is one of the reasons. Education systems are often not designed to respond to the specific learning needs of a student with autism, leading to frustration and dismotivation. Another reason is socialization problems, moving, and bullying. Studies show that the students with autism are more likely to be victims of bullying, which contributes to school dropout, especially when people with autism is 15, 16, 18 years old. Lack of teacher training. Many teachers do not have the necessary tools to address the needs of these pupils. Any inadequate transition between education stages. Changes such as moving from primary to secondary school can be challenges without adequate support. Another objective is employment. According to the data from Autism-Europe, between 75% and 90% of adults with autism are unemployed and do not participate in productive or work activities, which makes them the group with the highest employment rate within disabilities. For this reason, it's very important working in employment for all. We need legislative and policy initiatives on autism. The European Parliament has demonstrated an active commitment to promoting the rights and inclusion of people with autism through various initiatives and resolutions, especially the resolutions for October 2023. But we need a pact for autism in Europe. In fact, Autism-Europe, perhaps seven years old, proposed a pact for autism. It's very important, which seeks to develop concrete policies and allocate adequate funding to improve the quality of life and protect the rights of people with autism. In the next days, I will propose the creation of a European strategy on autism with the aim of ensuring that people with autism have access to the same opportunities and rights in European countries, promoting their inclusion and full participation in society. It's very important for all the collectivity, but especially for girls with autism, because the detection of girls have a lot of difficulties. Thank you so much, and we will work together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosa, and it's great to hear about this news today about a European strategy for autism. That's what we've been calling for. And now I'm delighted to give the floor to MP Agius Saliba. The floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, first of all, thanks Autism-Europe for organizing this high-level conference today, and also for giving us the possibility to come together to share our ambitions, share our goals, and also our commitment to build a more inclusive Europe also for autistic people. And there are a lot of challenges that we are facing on a daily basis, and I am tired of going around in our constituencies and listening not only directly from children, people being affected by autism, but also by their caregivers, by their parents, and the many broad issues that they are facing on a daily basis when it comes to being given the same opportunities to succeed in life. I believe that the momentum today, when it comes to continuing to strengthen the rights on a horizontal level for autistic people, is on the right path. And just last year, the President of the European Commission continued to reaffirm its commitment by calling also for a common approach to autism on an EU level, a vision which is also reflected in the Health Commissioner's mission letter. But the issue is that words alone are not enough. The recent concluding observations of the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability is another reminder for us that Europe still has a long way to go when it comes to fully realizing the rights and also the dignity of autistic people within the Union. It's also important to stress the significant gaps that we have when it comes to services for autistic people across Europe, whether it's education, whether it's employment, whether it's mental health care, or even basic diagnosis or intervention. The current system is failing too many people. It is unacceptable that waiting times for diagnostic services stretch for months, and I had some cases that it also stretched for years. And that public understanding of autism remained riddled with different misconceptions. Another very important issue is related directly to education. Education gives dignity to people, and it should be at the very heart of our response. The Parliament's resolution underlines the need to ensure that all autistic learners have equal access when it comes to quality education that respects their individual learning styles and provides the necessary support for each and every child to succeed. This means not only investing in accessible infrastructure, but also in training our educators, adopting also a curricula and creating school environments that celebrate neurodiversity. Inclusive education is both a right and also a very powerful tool when it comes to social inclusion. At the moment, we face a clear choice. We will let this moment pass, or we will act decisively to forge a community where autistic people are not only supported, but empowered to thrive. As policymakers, we must commit on a number of ambitions and on a number of targets. First of all, establishing a binding European autism strategy aligned with the CRPD. Secondly, promoting inclusive education across all member states, ensuring that mainstream schools are equipped with learners, including those on autism spectrum. Thirdly, investing in inclusive education and employment programs that support autistic people, improving access to quality diagnosis and also healthcare services, and ensuring that all policy decisions are co-designed with autistic individuals, because nothing about them should be ever decided without them. Let this conference not be an end to our conversation, but the start of a transformation that we so direly need. I believe that Europe that includes, a Europe that listens, a Europe that learns from its autistic citizens is a stronger, a fairer, and a more resilient union. I am very much looking forward to hearing from today's speakers, experts, researchers, and representatives from the autism community who will share valuable insights on the challenges that autistic people face, and also about the solutions that we must pursue. Their contributions will be essential as we work together to improve the access when it comes to services, when it comes to investing more EU funds in research, and also shaping the policies that reflect the real need of autistic people across our union. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Alex, for these strong words. And now I would like to pass the floor to Katrin.
Dear guests, we are talking about that. The UN Convention, a human right. When we're talking about inclusion, it's not about flowers and the bees, we are talking about a human right. And the EU was in Geneva, and that was time to report back how far is the EU when it comes to human rights. And I have only 3 minutes, and of course I can read that, the 26 pages, what the EU should do or must do, but let me summarize the demands, and the demands are still the same. And my colleagues from S&D, EPP, and we are here allies on that, and it's our second or third mandate, and I really appreciate your solidarity when it comes to disability rights. The demands are always the same. When it comes to the rights of girls with disabilities and women with disabilities, we are not visible. When it comes to persons with disabilities, we are talking about protect them. We are talking about what are we doing when we are on holidays. It's like where we put grandma to. Who's taking care of the dog? No. When we're talking about disabled people, we are talking about humans. And it's not about protecting and saving, it's about what you want to do. How you want to spend your vacation without mom and dad. And when we are talking about disability rights, we have that picture, oh, there's a missing ramp. But when we are talking about autism or people with autism, it's not visible. Sometimes you have that ableism or ableistic wording like they're strange people, they're real or kind of rare. And so we have a language issue. Then we have a language problem. And persons with autism are not visible. And it is not because you asked me today, say something about autism. We are talking about individuals. There is not the answer or the wording or the solution on autistic people. And here it must be clear, our rights are in danger again. We have that every day in our committees. We have that every day in our plenary week. We have a rollback. We have a rollback on how we deal with disabled people. I don't like the word deal with. You don't have to deal with me. You don't have to deal with my colleague. We are individuals, and that must be clear. And here we must be clear who's our ally. The times are getting harder. And we must be clear who's our ally. And the ally is not the guy or the group or the party who is on our side, but then the group has no problem to let people die in a Mediterranean Sea. I don't negotiate human rights. When we are talking about persons with disabilities, we are talking about persons with autism or women with disabilities. It's a woman in Syria, it's a woman in Iraq, it's a woman in Turkey, it's a woman in Germany, it's a woman in Spain, wherever. They want to separate us, and that is a danger. And they want to utilize us for that policy. And here we must be crystal clear. They cannot separate us. We are not the guinea pig that you can do something. No, I'm not a guinea pig. I'm a woman with a disability, and I'm a mother of a son or daughter with autism. And the mother in Turkey is relevant like the person in Spain with autism. And that's complicated, but as simple as it is. And here that UN Convention, easy to read, 26 pages. We, Rosa is here, my colleague Mr. Saliba is here, and we are working on the next strategy. And here it must be clear, persons with disabilities must have the right to go to court. That is in the UN Convention and the report. What about women and girls with disabilities? What about persons? We have a climate catastrophe. We have that drama and really, really awful situation in Spain and Valencia. So many people died in Valencia. And Valencia is only one simple example. But when I am deaf in Ukraine and I cannot hear the sirens, or I'm in a wheelchair in Valencia and the flood comes, who's protecting me? And who's seeing me? How can I get the information when I'm an autistic person? In Germany, they saved the elder people because that was visible. But people with mental disabilities died because it was not visible. They didn't have that group, that target group, on a screen. Oh, voilà, tant pis. Pech. How far are we as a member state? I can conclude we are not perfect. We failed. That's a bad info. Positive message is we have the opportunity to do it better. When it comes to right to vote for autistic people, how do I get the information? How do I get access when we have a political debate? And can I sit in a room with 20 people? Or is it difficult for me and I cannot attend? What is the alternative? Do I have the right to vote? Is it clear that I have the right to vote? Of course you have the right to vote, but do I get the information that I have the right? I heard from voices that, oh, if they have the information, then it's getting complicated for us as assistants. We have a bigger burden. Persons with disabilities, with autism, we are not a burden, we are customers, we are clients, we have money. And if you have money, you have influence. So, if you read the 26 pages, it's the same right to vote, to have the access to work and to live from it, stop funding institutions, and that is the work of the Commission, stop funding segregation, forced sterilization, forced abortion is still a topic, and it must be clear Women with disabilities are women and not a person with. My few words on that, and if you have questions, read the 26 pages, and for questions, reach out to us as parliamentarians. We are working on the disability strategy. We will push the Commission for something concrete and not only for guidelines. Please stop asking for guidelines. We don't need guidelines, we need a law. Thanks for that.
Good afternoon. So, how to get to a common approach for autism in Europe? Well, first, who are we? And secondly, what is a common approach? My name is Harald and I'm the president of Autism-Europe. It's an international association dedicated to the advancement of the rights for people with autism and to improve their quality of life. We represent about 90 autism organizations and people with lived experiences, coming from 40 different European countries, 26 of them which are members of the EU. One of our main missions is to liaison between European and international institutions to promote the understanding for the needs of people with autism, and not the least, how to translate them into action. When Autism-Europe was founded in 1983, autism was considered a rare disease. Well, now we know it's not a disease, and it's not rare. When EU was found, the prevalence of autism was 1 in 20,000. It is now 1 in 27. So we are many. The European Parliament has long been a supporter of autistic persons and their families. Comes to mind is the adoption of the Charter of Rights for Autism in '96, and later the written Declaration for a European Strategy for Autism in 2015. And now also the recent European resolution for harmonizing the rights of autistic persons in Europe, which is a very strong call for action. The European Commission's announcement last September about a common approach to autism at the EU level was warmly welcomed. But what is a common approach? Well, we know it has to be holistic across all sectors. I.e., that's access to the diagnosis, access to education, access to employment, access to health care, both somatic and mental, to community support for independent living, and I could probably keep the list going for a long, long time. We also know that it has to encourage the adoption of best practices and to support mutual learning between the member states. And we know it has to promote understanding and the removal of barriers. Creating an inclusive society for autistic people will not only require ensuring evidence-based or right-based practices, but also promoting training of professionals, and again, across all sectors in society. This month's the CRPD Committee of the UN has called on the EU to promote target action to address the barriers faced by autistic people. It requires autistic people and their representative organization to be duly consulted, and involved in the design and implementation of these actions. Which brings me to another topic of today. We're highlighting today some of the results of the EU-wide project AIMS2 trials. But we need to think about the future past the research of this significant endeavor. What is the next step? The research agenda needs to be framed by the priorities of the autistic people and their families in order to improve their quality of life. The EU has a vital role in supporting this research, and it has an obligation to promote research conducted with the meaningful involvement of autistic people and their families. It is crucial to ensure that the research addresses the issues that matter to the community. From a strictly personal point of view, the greatest achievement of AIMS2 trials is the creation of a real community involvement. Over the past 7 years, we've gone from minimal community involvement to something that hopefully may lead to what was dubbed an ethical reciprocal partnership. Can we have the same involvement when setting the agenda for future calls for EU research grants? My hope is that today will be interesting and give rise to thoughts on how we would go from a common European approach to a European strategy for autism. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Eva Loth, and I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. And I will also introduce some of my colleagues from AIMS2 trials who will tell you some of our work. As some of the speakers have already highlighted, autism is not a rare condition. Conservative estimates suggest that around 7 million people in Europe are autistic. But a diagnosis of autism alone tells us very little about what are the likely support needs of a particular autistic person throughout their life. Why is this so? Because autism is tremendously variable, not only in terms of the core features, but also because many autistic people have co-occurring mental health or physical features or condition. In practice, this means one size does not fit all. So our healthcare, social and educational systems must be able to support, on the one hand, an autistic child that is perhaps minimally verbal and needs 24-hour care, perhaps even when their parents are not around, as well as the autistic woman who excels in her job but suffers from mental health problems. And this is the core challenge that we aim to address in EU AIMS, which was our first consortium, and now AIMS2 trials, with the overarching goal to develop what we call precision medicine or precision health. This is the idea to tailor treatment or support to individual needs and profiles rather than a label. AIMS2 trials and new AIMS are funded by the Innovative Medicines Initiative, or now the Innovative Health Initiative, and our consortium includes 48 partners or partner institutions across 14 countries, from academia, industry, charities, and importantly, autistic people themselves. So what has AIMS2 trials achieved? For example, we created the largest research platform of longitudinal studies from infancy to adulthood, and importantly, we comprehensively characterized each volunteer in terms of their clinical features, cognitive profile, brain anatomy and function, immune markers, family psychiatric history, environmental factors, and genomics. So it's a holistic assessment. And we're using cutting-edge technologies and also developed several new analytic tools to do that. We set up a Europe-wide clinical trials network, including a range of rare genetic conditions linked to autism, and demonstrated the ability to conduct clinical trials at a much lower cost than pharma industry partners are typically doing. And this will enable us, including industry partners from pharma, but also from technology sectors, to test new treatments, to test new innovations, perhaps of those are more tractable, including epilepsy, rare conditions, or mental health problems. And most importantly, as was just said, we created a truly collaborative interdisciplinary research community with expertise from multiple different areas, and it includes people with lived experience. And this really has proven to be the key to make our research more relevant for autistic communities, to address the needs and priorities, and we've shifted and changed. We've shifted our focus from core features to mental health features to sleep and others. And this was done because autistic people told us that this is what mattered most to them. And also, importantly, we shifted from a deficit sort of flag framework to neurodiversity affirmative research. I would like to share 3 findings and policy actions that they might require. So, for example, we show that at the clinical as well as biological levels, there are enormous overlaps between autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. And that means that we need structural changes in diagnostic and care pathways that reflect this reality, rather than being assessed for one condition, and if a child or a young person doesn't happen to have this condition, to go back to square one and then wait for another year or 2 years to be reassessed for another potential neurodevelopmental condition. Secondly, there is no single part of the brain or cognitive feature or genetic marker that characterizes all autistic people. But this absence of a quick fix is not a failure, but instead reflects the maturity of science. So we must move away from deficit models that look at particular specific parts of a person, particular part of the brain or mind or body in isolation, to a more holistic sort of or interactive approach that tracks how mind, brain, body, and the social environment interact. And the implication for that is that disability is not only an individual trait, but in order to be able to have the best outcomes for a person and families, clinicians, need to work together as a society as a whole, and this is a shared responsibility. And then finally, this kind of work was only possible thanks to European funding. We got from the European Commission over the period of 12 years, 60 million euros, which is unprecedented in the history of autism research in Europe. It was really a game changer. But in comparison, over the same time, the European Commission spent around 900 million on heart disease and 4 billion in cancer research. So we need a concerted, not a fragmented sort of research approach, and this investment in autism research that we've enjoyed can't be the single investment in history, but it has to continue. So in closing, in Europe we are in a unique position now. We have an infrastructure, we have expertise to internationally lead on autism research in a more inclusive, precise and humane way, but now we need your help to realize this potential. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. Now I would like to call our first panel to discuss about priorities and challenges of the autism communities in Europe and what actions are needed to address them. So to continue the discussion.
Introduce myself. My name is Siti. I am a research associate from the Autism Research Centre based at Cambridge, and my colleagues and I there are from the policy research team as part of IMSU trials. And there you go, my slides are almost there. So yes, today I'm just going to talk a bit about some of our research findings on autistic people's access to services and to priorities for change in Europe. Alright, so I'm just going to show you a quote that we found in our survey. So we conducted a couple of surveys to understand autistic people's experiences with services. And this is a quote from a carer of a 16-year-old autistic teen. So I'm just going to read it out. Clearly evident comorbidities were ignored. History and symptoms of complex PTSD, body dysmorphic disorder, and GI tract-related problems were also ignored. Strong and clear features of pathological demand avoidance profile, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, and ADHD were not taken into consideration. Recommendation of school and learning support assistance was rejected, and no necessary accommodations were made in the school to support the learning, and consequently, the student is out of school from the last 3 years. This has further damaged the child's self-esteem, self-confidence, intensified his social anxiety and emotional sensitivity, to the point of several suicidal attempts. The child medication was revised, and currently he is without any medication because the child became resistant to medical treatment and apathetic occupational therapy practices. The whole family is suffering and has become dysfunctional due to no support from social services, healthcare providers, and the school. The only option given to family by child protection workers is to place the child in institutionalized general care home. Now, the autistic community is very diverse. You see people with various levels of support needs, but this is what we always see across our survey findings. We see people talking about the consequences, serious consequences of not providing sufficient services and sufficient services of good quality to people, autistic people who need them. So for today, I'm going to talk about some of our findings from a couple of studies that we conducted. So the first one would be access to services, and the next one would be on autistic people's priorities for change. And then I'm going to talk about what's next for us and what should we do with what we have found from our research. So we conducted a study called Access EU study, which looked at how well autistic people across Europe could access the services they needed. And this is what we found. So basically, as part of our research, we conducted an online survey, which was open from 2020 to 2022. It was available in multiple languages, and we had worked with autism community representatives throughout the study. So in the Access EU survey, we asked participants about their experiences attempting to access a variety of services. So there are at least 13 services that we asked them about, ranging from diagnostic services to employment services and to financial benefits or assistance. So we got data from 2,322 autistic people and carers throughout the EU and the UK, and these are some of our data. So we mainly analyzed data from recent attempts at accessing services. So we asked participants about their attempts to access services from the day that they completed the survey back to 2 years before. And what we found was that in terms of waiting time for services that they eventually got to access, most of these services had a waiting time of up to 6 months for most participants. So for example, educational therapy services would require on average 6 months for them to receive them. On the other hand, for urgent services, like GP and mental health crisis support services, you would need probably about a month for most participants to access them. But also do take in mind that for some of these urgent services, a month might not be quick enough. Even a few days might be long enough, especially if you're in an emergency. So we therefore need to improve our service delivery for autistic people. And this will be the results for whether autistic people have successfully or unsuccessfully accessed services. So I'm not sure if you can see the small font. I myself can't see it, but basically we had asked them about those services that you saw earlier on. So we asked them to list which of these services they had successfully accessed within those 2 years. Prior to the day that they completed the survey. So for this, the bars here represent successful access. So if you read out some of the results there. So the most accessible services are therapy, mental health, and medical services, hovering around 30%. So around 30% of participants said that they had ever accessed these services. And if you look at the red bars, they represent unsuccessful access to services. And so the most inaccessible services would be therapy, mental health, and financial services, among others, and you've got educational services there as well. So with these results in mind, we come to the conclusion that there is inconsistent access to services, and we see that across countries in Europe. So while an autistic person might have been successful at accessing a mental health care service, for example, at one time, and the other time they might be unsuccessful, so it's inconsistent and it's not helpful, unfortunately. It's also very important for us to look at quality of services, and then in the Access EU survey we had asked participants about how good the services are, and we have the data and we hope to eventually share the data one day, because it needs time to analyze. So for the next study, we asked participants, who asked autistic people across Europe, what they want to see change for them. So their priorities for change. So we conducted a survey called the 10 Points for Change survey, which is open for about 4 years, from 2020 to 2024. And like the Access EU survey, it was available in multiple languages, and we had worked with autism community representatives throughout the study development. And in the survey, we asked participants about at least 19 areas, and we asked them which of these areas do they want to change. And there can be multiple answers for that. So these areas include education, discrimination, early intervention, and support with daily living. Right, so these are our results. So we got data from over 1,700 autistic people, parents, carers, and members of autism-related organizations all throughout the EU and the UK. And as part of our results, we also asked participants about these areas and how they would rank those areas in importance of change. So we showed them the list of areas just now that you saw, and we asked autistic people who have been formally diagnosed with autism, could you rank these areas in order of importance, with number 1 being the most important area that you want to see change. So these are the results, the top 10 areas here. So the top 4 areas are education, public awareness and understanding of autism, employment, and government funding for autism-specific services. And you also see that this group also educated other areas such as bullying and abuse, diagnostic services, and mental health care. So these are very important for autistic people with formal diagnosis. For carers, we asked them the same question, and this is what they said. So these are the top 10 areas that they want to see change for autistic people. If you could see the top 4 areas, these are the same areas that had been indicated by autistic people, which are education, government funding for services, public awareness, and understanding of autism, as well as employment. And besides those, parents and carers also said that changes are needed for early intervention, social inclusion and support, as well as support with daily living. Right, so what we can conclude from these findings is that there are so many similarities in terms of priorities for change across autistic people, as well as parents and carers, but there are also some differences in their priorities which reflect their specific needs, like how, for example, parents and carers tend to prioritize diagnostic services more, or early intervention more compared to autistic people. So what's next for us? So what we plan to do is to share more data from our studies and service quality suggestions for improvement according to autistic people. So from the Access EU study, we had asked participants about how good the services were. So we want to share that hopefully one day. It takes some time. Also suggestions. We also had in the 10 Points for Change study, we asked participants what are the suggestions for improvement, for change in these areas, and we are currently analyzing those suggestions. We will also like to continue advocating, promoting policy changes that will improve autistic people's well-being and experiences based on what we hear from them in our research. So what should we do with what we have known so far? what these findings tell us is how important it is for us to come up with a common approach to autism. So these issues, what we see from our survey, are consistently found across countries in our sample across the EU and the UK. So it's very important for all these countries, for all of us to come together to come up with a common approach to autism. And some of the things that we can all together do, despite differences in our political structures or in our community, is to ensure that everyone within the autistic community, despite the huge and amazing diversity in the community, needs to be supported no matter what. It's also very important to improve diagnostic services because long waiting times for diagnosis are very common across Europe. And it's also very important to listen to the autistic community, to understand their experiences better, and to know what they're going through in order to serve them better. And it's imperative for us to take action because urgent policy changes are necessary. So, I know that there are many of us here who have the power to impact autistic people's lives directly. So, policy changes, for example, or recommendations that Autism-Europe have come up with recently would be, for instance, to ensure meaningful and continuous consultation and involvement of autistic people and their representative organizations in any policy or research that is designed, and also to invest more to fund training, to promote training of staff across sectors, including healthcare and education, in order to improve accessibility of services for autistic people and to ensure inclusion of autistic people within the society. Right, so I'm going to end with some parts of the quote that we had seen just now. So the 16-year-old teenager from Finland who had been struggling a lot with the lack of services. So, regardless of what role you are in, whether you're in an EP, you are working in a research institute or an organization, or just whoever you are, we all have a responsibility to help. And we all can actually contribute to the autistic community by exacting these policy recommendations, by helping each other, and I hope that everyone here will join us in that and help us in that. So I'm just gonna end with some acknowledgements. These are so many names, I'm not gonna mention everyone, but so many people have contributed to our research. Researchers, ARAPs, or community representatives, one of them Pierre, who's beside me. And then we got so many universities and institutes, organizations such as Autism-Europe and charities who have come together to contribute significantly to this research. So we hope to see similar endeavors in the future for this. And last but not least, there's this QR code here. I'm not sure if you can scan it from where you are, but hopefully you can. If you have any questions at all about our research, feel free to approach me. Or Rosie there. Rosie is the lead for MC Trials at Cambridge, so she has been integral in research. And you can approach any one of us for questions and scan a QR code for more results from our findings for research. All right, thank you very much. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Pierre, who's going to speak more about experiences from the autistic community.
Okay, so I will share some highlights from community standpoint on those two research. So we have discussed with my colleagues, autism representatives in MC Trials from the policy working group, and we have some points that we would like to put ahead out of these two countries are very different. Their successes or failures are very different. And the second one shows that the underlying needs from the communities are similar. So that calls for a common approach, and that term is really what we need now, that common approach, because we need more justice, like we should have the same opportunities whatever country we're in. And it's a matter of effectiveness as well. If we decide a policy, we should not reinvent the wheel each time. We should just understand the facts and converge towards a policy that is good for everyone. So a common approach is what we need, but this, as Eva said, this is not a call to have a one-size-fits-all kind of solution, because autism is incredibly, has an incredible diversity in it. We're talking about 1 to 3% of the population, but in these 1 to 3% there are more diversity than in the rest of the population. So you can't just understand autism in an easy way, as we used to understand it before. And if you add to that diversity, all the different life contexts and personal histories that make personality, that makes life, then every situation is different, every situation is unique. So implementing a policy, especially at the European level, is not something easy when you have to take into account that diversity. So this is not something that has to be done from behind the curtain, but it needs to be done with the community engagement. That's really something that is that we've shown in aims to trials, when including the community in the thinking, we get to much better results. So here again, when thinking about that common approach, we need to engage with the community policymakers and community together. And what we're speaking about is not just targeting about for one minority in the population. What we're talking about is investing in people. It's investing now to save later. For example, if you take education, if we put what it takes to get the autistic kids in the mainstream education with equal opportunities to everyone, that takes a lot of effort, but it's worth it. If you take healthcare, access to healthcare is notoriously difficult for autistic people. But here again, prevention is an investment. So these two examples, we could find many others showing that what we're talking about is investing in people. And it's not investing in just one tiny fraction of the population. Autism prevalence is increasing, as we know, but here we're speaking also about everybody who is impacted by autism. And this is families, this is teachers, this is healthcare professionals, this is a wide portion of the population. Will probably take over 10% of the population. And if we're tackling autism, we're tackling neurodiversity, because now we know that autism is not just a strict definition, but we're speaking a spectrum of neurodiversity. And here we're speaking about 20% of the population, so we're definitely not into a rare thing, and we're into a portion of the population that is worth mentioning. And if we come to solutions for that population, for this population, we're offering alternatives to a wider portion of population as well. And ultimately, what we need to think is unlocking potential. We have lots of people, lots of autistic people, all with their talents, their resources, and their needs. But we would be stupid not putting those strengths into society. So we, as autistic people, need policymakers to support us in order to ultimately allow us to contribute to society. We want to be in the society, we want to contribute, we want to give our strength to society. And for that, we need to, that policymakers support us in that direction.
Thank you so much.
I don't know how many times in the history of this room there have been two people from Mallorca sitting on the podium here, because believe it or not, maybe 70% or 80% of the population in Europe have been at least once in Mallorca, but not that many have been born in Mallorca. And autism is not rare, but being born in Mallorca is rare. I will continue with the topic that we were discussing, which is how research can lead us to identify unmet needs and areas for improvement within the autistic community in Europe. And I will do that by presenting you a study that was conducted in a joint venture with the European Brain Council, EBC, and aims to trials. So that's the pathway for autism with and without epilepsy. So that's my disclosure in private and public funding for the last 10 years. Next. So what is a pathway? It's a multidisciplinary management tool that allows us to optimize the way people, European citizens that need any kind of care, healthcare, or whatever, any kind of care can have access to it. And by identifying what are the bottlenecks, what are the difficulties, what are the missing information that is there. So for those of you who are interested in the results, because I don't have much time to go over them, these have been published in the journal European Psychiatry. You can go and you will see the two papers there. They were recently published, and I had the opportunity to be a co-author with Pierre Violland and many other aims to trials researchers, including AREPS. So the care pathway of autistic children and care pathway of autistic children with associated epilepsy, that's what I'm going about to present, is analyzed from, and this is important, from a carer, community, and professional perspective. And what we aimed was, there were some previous studies published on care pathways, but they were conducted mostly in adults. So we restricted the age range for inclusion criteria to autistic children ages 0 to 18. We did it in 3 countries, Italy, Spain, and the UK. And with a focus on defining critical points, delays in screening and diagnosis, personalized support, and epilepsy as a condition. We included a total of 712 subjects, and we did the analysis on 663 that we made sure had all the inclusion criteria. So it may be difficult for you to see, but what we have here is that first on your left, yeah, you will see that there is a huge delay in between when the parents first notice that there was something going on until they receive a screening appointment, and that was 40 something for 49 for the UK, 22 in Spain, and 15% in Italy. Was more than a year, and in some cases 2 to 3 years. That was just for the screening appointment. Later on, when it comes to a diagnosis, 68% of carers in the UK, 42% in Spain, and 24% in Italy reported that it took more than a year after screening the visit to have a diagnosis and assessment. So that altogether, if you sum up, it's like 2 years for around 40 to 50% of these families. And we know that the earlier you give support, the earlier you make a diagnosis, the better the outcome. And actually, the NICE guidelines say that it should be 3 months maximum before you get a screening and a diagnosis when the parents notice something. So that caused a lot of dissatisfaction in these families that responded to the survey. dissatisfaction with the waiting times, and that forced many of these families to attend the private sector. And I think it's completely unfair that we force and we push families to the private sector and making them pay for these services, because the public system does not provide them in a timely way. They also were concerned about lack of personalized support once the diagnosis has been confirmed. So there's not only a delay in screening, there's a further delay in the diagnosis, and then there's a further delay in the way they get some personalized support for the needs that they may have. 62% of carers reported that it was not easy to access information about early detection services in the 3 countries altogether. And when it comes to epilepsy, which is quite common, and depending on the different studies, may range to 10 up to 20% of autistic children having epilepsy. There was also inadequate screening, with a lack of involvement by neuropediatricians or neurologists in all 3 countries. And again, one thing to notice is that there is a wide variety and heterogeneity in terms of the 3 countries that we assess. But the majority did not have one of these 2 specialists involved in the diagnosis of epilepsy in autistic children. 44% of survey respondents stated that their children's healthcare provider did not screen the children for epilepsy using an EEG after autism diagnosis. So if in any other area of medicine, you have something that you expect to be that prevalent of 10, 15, 20%, for sure there would be a kind of a screening, or at least an EEG, which is extremely cheap and fast to do. So this is some striking data on how some of these conditions like epilepsy, that again, when treated earlier, has a better prognosis, are not really dealt in the right way. And next. So I'm going to finish with some not quantitative but qualitative data, and these were answers, textual, that we got from the carers. No one from a health service mentioned a possibility of autism until my child was 11 years old. Health professionals are not trained in autism. There are not enough diagnosis clinic services. Never received any early intervention program. Early intervention is crucial, and I was given minimal information after diagnosis. And my last slide is just to thank all the different people that were involved in this study, including associations, EBC, and industry. And with that, I give the floor to Pierre Violland, that will discuss and give conclusions about the results that we saw in this study. Thank you very much.
That's another study that shows another part of the picture, of the big picture of autism. So we're focusing here on the first years in autism and the discovery of autism in children. And here, so as Celso said, we saw a lot of gaps between what should be and what is actually, and lots of differences between just 3 countries. So imagine if we had all the countries in Europe, we would have a very diverse picture. And here, so once again, we need harmonization, we need to think together, we need to define what the wanted picture is, taking into account, once again, all that diversity in autism, all those difficult situations. One striking thing is how long it takes to just get to diagnosis or even screening, when you know that early intervention is known to be the thing, is known to be the one thing that gives opportunities, that gives chances to children. So this is definitely something that this has shown, and we should keep it on the top of the list. One thing as well, I like this study because we're speaking about the pathway in general and the pathway for kids with epilepsy. And epilepsy is a good example because supposedly something which is known, it is something which is easy to diagnose, and it appears that it's not, because epilepsy and autism is atypical. It can just be overlooked by practitioners. It needs special education. It needs more experience from practitioners to spot that. Treatment as well is specific. So there are a lot of things in that specific case of epilepsy, but epilepsy is only one of the co-occurrences of autism. So when I was speaking about a complex picture, you can imagine how complex that can be. I think, and we think that the key message is to raise awareness, and we need to all the stakeholders, first to parents and families, because here in this study we're speaking about children who have been screened and whose parents agreed to go further on the process, but so many times parents are so scared about that A word, the autism word, that they just say no, it can't be that, and they just don't listen to professionals telling them that their child has specific needs. So parents need and families need to be aware of what autism is, but just to de-dramatize the outcome. When autism is a known fact and when it's taken early, things can go well as well. It's not as dramatic as people think it could be. Also, community needs to be more aware, and I'm thinking specifically about epilepsy because that's something I discovered during that study, how you could be yourself impacted by epilepsy without even knowing. So that's something that should be said even more. And of course, professionals, primary care provider, healthcare professionals, and childhood professionals, they all need to know more about what autism is, really what it looks like, what it means to be autistic, and same goes for epilepsy as well, and all the big co-occurrences. But that's really something that at the European level should happen, is push toward that awareness, that general awareness of what autism is. Another aspect, and we've already been speaking of that, but I'll push that again, is making partnerships. And partnership is really the key word here. Policymakers with communities, we have already spoken of that, but there's a lot of complexity in the situation, and to manage correctly that complexity and finding the right solutions, we need to work together, community and policymakers. What we've done in NEMS trial showed it, and now we all believe that this should be the norm in research. So Europe should make it the norm for all its member states to work with the communities, with the local communities. That should be really how it works from now on. Another kind of partnership that should be pushed somewhat is that parents are the specialists of their children, and it's often overlooked by professionals. This is something that's being shown in that specific study. When parents have concerns, sometimes, not to say most of the times, you find professionals saying, no, it's not a big deal, or maybe let's wait another year and see how it is. No, if parents are concerned, they have to be taken seriously and being supported by professionals. And last but not least, of course, resources, because we need that, we need more. We saw the delays in the healthcare system. You can't wait a year to have your child screened for autism after the first concerns. That's just not possible. That's putting children at risk and families at risk. We also need to increase support to families that feel like they're left alone after diagnosis, and that's when they need support, and including peer support. I'm a peer support worker, and I know how useful it can be. There are countries more advanced than others on that aspect, but this really should be also the norm in the European Union, that autistic people are the best people to speak about autism. So we have our place in that overall healthcare system and support system to families and also concerned people. Developing evidence-based intervention, so that's the core of phase 2 trials, and we've shown that we have the knowledge, we have the know-how, we have all it takes to do it even further now. So this happens in Europe now. We need to push it again and again and use the talents that are here to find the next solutions. And Celso also mentioned that the economic inequality, if you have access to private support, your life is much better at any age. We're not only speaking about children, but at any age, and that's something that should not happen here in Europe now. Public system should be good enough to take care of everyone, and that's really something that should change now. So thank you.
Thank you. Next slide. So I think to end this session, I'm going to draw on some of the themes that have been brought up by my colleagues and other speakers, and particularly tell you about some of the broader research that we've done within AIMS2 that both highlights these challenges, but also some of the ways forward. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about under-identified groups, so both early diagnosis, as we've heard about, but also women and girls and autism in adults. And then individuals with highest support needs, who, as we know, experience often the most challenging consequences of some of their difficulties, and are still massively understudied and under-supported. And then the critical importance of mental health for autistic people, which we know is relevant for autistic people with a range of different support needs. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we've done within AIMS and what that points to in terms of solutions. Next. So early diagnosis, we've heard quite a bit about early diagnosis, and it remains critically important because we know that parents often first raise concerns in toddlerhood, but then, as Celso showed, often diagnosis is 1, 2, 3, sometimes 20 years later. So there's a huge gap between when parents first. This is where we work with infants who have a family history of autism, because we know that autism runs in families. So infants who have an older sibling with autism have about a 20% chance next of developing autism by 3, and by the age of 7 or 8 it could be up to 40% in these respective cohorts next. So we can follow infants from birth through to toddlerhood or childhood, and that helps us identify what the early signs are, which is what we need to do in order to improve some of these early diagnosis and early identification approaches next. And we know that social engagement is something that often parents first worry about, but one of the key things to know about that is that often infants with later autism are really interested in faces and people early on, and then what happens is that drops off over developmental time. So decreases in social interest, social engagement, social communication are a really key early sign next. But we also know from what autistic people have told us that social differences aren't often the key thing. Often sensory differences are much more challenging, and we also see these appearing from infancy too next. So for example, we can use different experiments to look at how babies respond to their sensory environment. And we see differences in how their eyes respond to light changes or how their brains respond to sounds, which suggests that even from infancy, babies are finding it harder to tune out things in the environment they should be ignoring or that other children would be able to ignore. So we think that both sensory differences in infancy are important in terms of early identification, but thinking about the sensory environment that baby's in is also going to be super critical next. And then finally, we also see these differences in sleep emerge really early. So sleep can be a huge problem for many autistic people. And from the age of 14 months, babies with later autism sleep like an hour less a night on average, which obviously has huge impacts for their families and for them, for their brain development. So we think through these kinds of approaches, through coming together to build these big cohorts across Europe, we can start to identify a broader range of early signs, early challenges that should really help with understanding what it is we should be looking for early identification and detection approaches. Next. But we know it's not just babies, as Celso mentioned, that when we look at rates of detection of autism, they're massively increasing in adult groups particularly, so adults who might have been missed as children or who may have different patterns of autistic features that are not necessarily that well recognised. So it's super important that we continue to think about how can we better detect autism in adults too. Next. and particularly for women and girls. So again, over time, we're identifying more and more girls and women with autism, but we're still massively under-identifying girls and women, probably relative to boys. And some of that is to do with what we call masking. So many autistic women might be really good at having social interests that appear in inverted commas typical, or learning how to hide some of their different traits, but that can have a cost in terms of mental health and anxiety. So in terms of what we need to do, research on surveillance methods, research on what the different patterns of autistic features might be in different under-identified groups, and minoritized groups are also super important here. But there is a ton of European investment that we can build on, so both aims to COST-ESIA, which is a cost network on this area, and continuing to conduct rigorous intervention trials, because although we do know that early intervention's good, actually the evidence base is not great, and continuing to do rigorous studies on what we should be doing for those families early on is super important. So then the second group that we really need to maintain our focus on are individuals with high support needs. Often that's autistic people with intellectual disability, but not always, because people who have high support needs have a much higher mortality rate than other people. Often epilepsy is hugely important, but also accidental death, drowning, suicide. So super important that we continue to try to improve quality of life for people who do have higher support needs. And there's a huge cost to society of supporting autistic people to live full and fulfilling lives, and that's relevant because we're not doing that at the moment particularly well, so we need to improve how we're going about improving quality of life for all autistic people. But I think there are some solutions or potential solutions on the horizon. So for some people with high support needs, they will have an identified genetic difference, and that actually is allowing a lot of progress in understanding what those genetic differences are and how we might use gene therapies or new medications to treat some of the biological pathways that are relevant there, which may well be relevant to epilepsy and to some of the things that do cause premature death for a lot of people with high support needs. So we need to make sure that genetic testing is accessible to people across the EU, that we have a pipeline for developing those new gene therapies and those medications. So for example, in AIMS 2, we have a registry of people across Europe with genetic information so that we can go back and contact people if they are eligible for trials to make sure that we're democratizing access to research for underserved people across the European community. Next. And then finally, when we're thinking about treatment or support, we shouldn't just be thinking about people with high support needs or intellectual disability. Lots of autistic people already struggle with mental health. And at the moment, the treatment pathways for mental health conditions in autism are the same as mental health conditions for anybody else. But it actually may be that autistic people respond very differently to anxiety medications or to CBT. So we need to be making sure that we're continuing to research what are the differences in mental health treatments that are effective for autistic people. That means we need to understand brains and brain mechanisms that might be relevant to developing different kinds of medications for mental health in autistic people, or different types of CBT or cognitive therapies, and that we're then adjusting treatment pathways correspondingly. And so one thing next that we did within AIMS was build, as Eva mentioned, this data set of brain imaging and cognitive and mental health data over time, to try to understand what might predict mental health trajectories for autistic people and what might be the appropriate supports or treatments for that. And then the clinical trial network that was also mentioned is a network of trial-ready sites across Europe, so that when there are new medications or adaptive interventions, we can run high-quality trials more efficiently at lower cost and more effectively than we could before. Next. So I think that the investment that the EU's already made in AIMS to trials has created something of a template that's going to help Europe figure out how to lead the way in this area relative to a lot of other areas in the world right now. And I think it provides some ideas, or at least inspiration, for a potential roadmap for where we need to invest, both research-wise, but also in terms of some of these networks and infrastructures that can really help accelerate autism research for the next 10 years. With obviously keeping in sight that the goal is to improve outcomes for autistic people without losing sight of how neurodiversity enriches society.
hope you can hear me. I'm Salima. I'm coming from Liège. And thanks to Autism-Europe and all people who contributed for today, it is possible to resume a little bit into the point of the situation where commissioners and MPs, associations and so on, they are at the moment. However, I speak as a sibling of a person with autism, but severe autism, which means that this person, Zineb, is not independent. So this is a category, a niche of autism, and autism is already a niche in disabilities. What I experienced by attending to meetings and all possibilities and opportunities to engage with this cause, I see that, or I feel, we are losing time when speakers direct to us their results and aims and objectives. People like me who deal with persons with severe autism are left out. I don't feel addressed anymore, also because Zineb is 26 years old. We came to Belgium for her when she was 16 years old. Time is running, and something that maybe we can do, I speak as an individual, I'm not part of any association at the moment. Perhaps we can try to start to find common grounds on terminology. And these may help also policymakers into helping us write policies for commissioners, because the broad public, they don't understand what autism is, let alone severe autism. And every country uses a different terminology to explain what it is, unless we are working in a common project at the EU level. And people find a huge confusion, and it's very difficult to empathize with the public. So first of all, I feel we need to work on a common terminology. Second, you ask for our help. What am I supposed to do in concrete? I try to take as many information as possible. However, in my future, I see it very difficult because, yes, parents, but us siblings, this is our biggest heritage that we have. We don't sleep at night because we don't know not if we will pass an exam or not, but how will I take care of that person even during COVID, to follow lectures online when the person is screaming on the other side of the room. It is very difficult, so you can be the best person, but you become involuntarily dysfunctional. And we are speaking within each other now, but another difficulty I have is to advocate. How do you want me to advocate this situation without offending the achievements that have been done for persons with autism that are fully dependent, and they can work, and the problem is in the employment and education. But if they wanted to, if they were supported rightfully, they could. However, I am part of a niche that cannot access to employment, cannot vote. So it's a person that received a little help from the government, but is never going to be looked up by MEPs because it's not going to be providing a vote for them. So I am the caretaker. What do you want me to do? How do you want me to help you out? Also for advocacy, I don't want to ruin your achievements, because if I say what am I going through, other people with autism, they'll be like, no, that has nothing to do with me. I can set an alarm, take a transport, go to work, and so on and so forth. So this has blocked me a lot in the past years, because whatever I try to attempt to do, it feels like I am ruining your achievements toward the cause. And there has been a lot that has been done by associations and individuals. So yes, apart from the help from my side, but should we start really walking toward a common ground with the community and work on harmonizing at least the wordings so that we can write things
together and help each other with the expertise that we have. Yeah, this is my question.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Effie. I'm also primarily here as a parent of a child with autism. I want to address Salima and thank her for what she said, because she has said the words that I'm unable to find many times. This niche she's referring to is a niche many of us belong to. I would plead for the authors of new policies to involve people like her and me, because even if I work in this policy area, of course I'm not one of those that have a big impact. When I read policy documents, I work in the European Commission, but I'm here as a mother. I'm often thinking, do they know anything about this? And they're talking to me only about the very high functioning, that of course I respect, and we must do things for everybody. But we're talking about work and voting and all that. Is there any idea about our needs? Or there's this very strict approach to do not fund anything that can be institution. But what about the little girl I saw in the Castilla y León that cannot look at anyone? What is she gonna do in the meeting? Cannot stand any noise. You're just gonna close everything without services existing and put her in a classroom? What about the fact that many kids cannot just go to a hospital for a blood test, they cannot stand all this commotion? What about the fact that I fear that my son may be killed by police one day if he has a crisis and they don't know about his condition? They just think he's freaking out and going crazy and like beat him up to death. Really, I'm very disappointed. But like I say, I don't want to ruin a lot has been done and we are grateful for that. I also want to say that in past meetings, even in other contexts, but also official EU Commission context, I spoke as a person again. This is many years ago. I was told twice by two different EU commissioners that are not in office anymore, okay, write us all your suggestions. I spent days and hours, never got a response. So I don't want to contribute individually, but you should really make sure you listen to people like her, and it doesn't have to be me, but more people like her, please. Thank you.
Yeah, completely. And I think that's partly why I wanted to point out on my 3 underserved groups that individuals who have, and you're completely right, there's lots of terminology, and that's one of the problems. So the Lancet Commission recently proposed this term profound autism to try to recognise that perhaps societal representations of autism have shifted a long way away from kids who have really need for residential care or have really severe challenges, and so that's one terminology, but it's also been one that's been quite controversial in some areas of the autism community. High support needs is another. But some of the working aims too around the EAGA registry is for kids and people who have intellectual disability or epilepsy or profound impairment, and the idea is to make sure that we're building a cohort of kids and adults across Europe that might benefit from certain types of new medicine or genetic medicines, so that we can recontact kids. And the idea, I think, is that for a lot of people who have more profound autism or higher support needs, that new medicine is going to be critical. We also need a lot more support and societal inclusion, but new biomedical approaches, particularly to associated conditions, eye problems, epilepsy, sleep, are going to be super important. So I think there is a recognition in the research community that it's been a massively underserved group for a long time. And I think it's still a work in progress. Eva, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to say to add to that, but I think it's also super important that your voices continue to be heard, because I think you're right, sometimes it doesn't percolate into broader society in the way that it should do, and we do a lot of work with siblings in our family studies, and siblings particularly are often a completely unsupported group of people. We talk about parents, we talk about autistic people, and we don't talk about family members, but it's super critical.
Right, thank you very much. So I really understand how you feel. Sorry. Well, but I do understand that most of the focus is not placed on the carers, although you have such huge burden on your shoulders. And I personally think that you have helped a lot with being here. You ask yourself what you can do to help, and you have been helping us with telling us about your experiences as a research point of view of a researcher. We in our studies and our surveys, we look at experiences of autistic people and carers like you, and we want to use that as evidence-based approach for better policies to serve autistic people better. So I think you've helped. You join your responsibility as a carer, and the onus and the responsibility to do more should not be on you. I think it should be on the policymakers and people who provide services, because they should. It's their responsibility to serve you and your autistic family member better. So, and yeah, thank you very much. You've helped a lot actually by being here today.
I had a question about the trials research, and I saw that the next step was to engage community, and I was wondering how did you implement it to make participatory research when designing the study and also interpreting results?
Autistic research needs to how we implemented it and how it's going to have a very
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, the question was how did you implement it, participatory research when designing the study and interpreting results?
That's a really good question. So I think to me what stands out is really the building of trust, and this is something that can't happen overnight, and it took us several years, and we had also misunderstandings, and we had starts and then stops and so on and so forth. But I think gradually, when all the parties begin to understand that they want to understand each other, even if they come from different backgrounds, I think that's the basis for being connected. And I think once we came over this first critical hurdle, everything became so much easier, right? Our interactions before were a bit stilted, they were coordinated by some other parties, which was useful and perhaps necessary at the beginning, but now it's much more natural. Now it feels like, to me at least, like a partnership. If I have a question, I go to AREPs and ask them, does that feel right to you? And bounce back.
Train the scheme nowadays, and I can say from Italy because I was born there. And then we came here to Belgium for this reason. We traveled a lot with Zineb, but now she's at a point of high segregation. So from a family who can take a camper and these and travel and everything with whatever conditions so that just the kid can see the world, I can say that today there is no door to be opened. We are really at the limit. And of course, then what am I and other siblings are supposed to do? We can be the best students, the best whatever, but if we are also segregated, there is no free movement for people. Airports, they are still not today welcoming persons with disabilities or other neurotypical divergencies. So from here, like if I am blocked to move with an airplane at the airport, then even family members, caretakers cannot relocate to find better employment. We are all blocked, and we need a way to act, to move on, but how? How are we going to help policymakers if we also can't come up with the same terminology to explain the same situation, the same cause? Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you so much. It's for this sense of urgency, and of course we need to take action. We cannot delay any longer. But yeah, I'm aware also that we have other speakers that are still due to speak. So I will invite you also to connect during the reception after the event and ask further questions if you like to the speakers who will be with us. So there's still more opportunity for interaction and question, but I would like now to call to the panel our last speakers of today, who are Ima Placencia from the European Commission, a senior expert on disability, and Adam Harris, the CEO of AsIAm, the Irish autism charity, and a member of the executive committee of Autism-Europe. Thank you.
Many thanks, and I suppose at the outset I just want to acknowledge that I think for many people this has been a difficult discussion, and I think difficult discussions unfortunately are sometimes part of the advocacy journey that we're all on. And I suppose just by way of introduction, I lead an organisation in Ireland called AsIAm. We're an autistic-led organisation. We're also the main national autism charity in Ireland, and we're looking forward later on this year to hosting the 14th Autism-Europe Congress. And I think in the context of that discussion, what I would just want to say really clearly at the start, having listened to the many voices and perspectives in the room today, is that co-creation is absolutely possible. Within our organisation, within our membership, within all those who engage with us, we have autistic people, we have parents of autistic people, we have people who have been committed and worked in the field for long periods of time, we have people who have higher support needs, we have parents and advocates of people with higher support needs. And I think while it's so easy in a community as diverse as ours, in a community as underserved as ours, to get into a space of dividing, to get into the space of thinking it's him or me, it's them or us, I think what we should really remind ourselves again and again is that this is a conversation about rights holders. And when we approach this conversation through the lens of rights holders, what we're recognizing is that each individual should receive the support that they need to engage in the community and to have the same chance in society. And I think we need to continuously bring the conversation back to that fundamental principle of rights holders. I also think in listening to the conversation today, I think a common source of frustration that we hear in Ireland, that I know people will hear in member states across the EU, that think we hear at a European level, is that we have so many policies, we have so many strategies. Some are excellent, some are less excellent, but I think a common source of frustration is often the failure of implementation. And I think that is a common area that we should be focused on. And I suppose as a result of we're talking about looking to the future and looking to where we need to get to in this issue over the coming years, I think it's actually also important for us to acknowledge the context that we're already in, the policy that already exists, the autistic voices that have already been heard, and ask ourselves, what do we do? How do we intend to act upon those voices in the time ahead? I want to acknowledge the motion of the European Parliament in 2023 on harmonising the rights of autistic people across Europe. And I think it made a number of very important guiding principles which align with Europe's obligations under the UN CRPD and which I think align with the perspective of both autistic people and families. And that motion stressed the importance of research on autism to uphold the strongest ethical standards. It highlighted the facts that autistic people remain largely excluded from research, including academic, clinical, and medical research that directly concerns the community. It also highlighted the need to ensure that where the European Commission is funding and engaging in research, that it itself needs to champion the role of autistic people and families through that process. I think it also acknowledged within that motion the progress that has been made, but perhaps also where progress has not gone far enough or has not been far enough. A key example of that is the EU Disability Card, which I know is an initiative that is welcomed by many member states and many members of the disabled community. And yet there is a reality that there remains a risk across Europe that the disability status of the autistic community remains challenged and does not remain universally recognised. And I think in having this debate, we must protect the rights of autistic people as a protected minority and as a community within the disabled community. Additionally, it highlights the fact that obviously we have secured the European Accessibility Act in recent years, and yet there still remains the reality that that act has not gone far enough in terms of autistic accessibility. The issue of autistic accessibility remains a relatively niche area of exploration, and in particular the failure of that act to look at the built environment and its impact on autistic people means that autistic people will continue to face access to barriers across European life not just in terms of autism-specific services, but in areas such as employment, in areas such as healthcare, education, lifelong support, and participation in the cultural and social life of the Union as well. I do think it's very welcome that the current EU presidency has committed to autism research in the years ahead, but I do think there is a challenge to the EU Commission as well. I note that the only reference to autism within the Commission's mandate places it in the same areas of research as things such as cancer research, cardiovascular disease, degenerative disease. And I think we need to see a very clear commitment from President von der Leyen and from the European Commission to demedicalise autism research and to take a rights-based approach to this conversation. And of course, that's not a source of opinion. That is Europe's obligation as a union that has ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That convention makes 15 direct references to the rights of autistic people and raises concerns in areas as diverse as stigma and attitudes, to prenatal eugenics, to involuntary detention, to shortcomings in EU strategy in terms of what they do for autistic people. And what I think that very clearly establishes is the need for the European Union to put in place a dedicated European autism strategy, which is something that Autism-Europe has long called for, and I know that we'll all very much welcome the commitment from the member Estaras today. I think in talking, having set that context and looking to the future, it is very much the case, and I think the community across Europe will have felt it, in particular this World Autism Month, in particular since the turn of the year in 2025, that our community is very much living in a VUCA context at the moment. We're living in a volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous time. And I think for many there will be a sense of dystopia in recent times, how the conversation from autism since the start of the year has shifted backwards, as conversations that have long been discredited and disproven by scientific research have returned to the fore. And I think it's important to say those driving those conversations around the world are certainly not motivated by research, they're certainly not motivated by science, and they're certainly not motivated by human rights. So I think there is a real need in the time ahead to ensure that Europe takes a strong role in protecting diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives within businesses that are operating within the Union, that it attacks head-on the growth in misinformation, which our community in a recent survey, 91% felt there had been a significant growth in misinformation around autism in the last 12 months alone. There's also a need to, in tackling misinformation, to address head-on the misinformation that many national governments are spreading about overdiagnosis of autism, which is often a conversation that has taken place in the context of officials failing to provide for a need, as opposed to actually establishing any sort of a clear or credible evidence base for overdiagnosis. So just in conclusion, I think there's a number of policy areas that are really important to the European Union in the time ahead. We need to shift the conversation from autism prevalence to autism demographics. As we see more people accessing autism diagnosis, as we see our community age, as we see more autistic adults access diagnosis later in life, how can we make sure that we have the systems at a national and European level to meet that demand? How can we ensure that autism-specific policy is protected and legislated for, both at a member state and at an EU level? How can we make sure that we not only protect autism-specific policy, but recognise the need to autism-proof European policy more generally? And I think our issues from COVID-19 pandemics to artificial intelligence highlight the urgent need to do that. I think we need to shift the conversation away from why is there such demand for autism-specific services to why do mainstream services in Europe continue to remain so inaccessible for autistic people as a whole. And I think it's also important to recognise that partnership in this conversation is going to be absolutely key. As we face a growing rise in misinformation, we need to have a stronger relationship between autistic activists and advocates and researchers. And I think in doing that, there's an obligation to put ethics at the heart of that conversation. There's an important need to make sure that that engagement is meaningful and not tokenistic. There's a need to acknowledge the failures of the past, and there's a need to ensure that research uses the right language, is rights-based, and is UNCRPD compliant. Because I think it's important that in the context of this conversation, we don't fall into the trap of our times where we seek to simplify, we seek to make generalizations, we seek to make sweeping statements, but rather we should be open to embracing the diversity, the intersectionality, the overlapping needs which exist within our community. So in summary, autistic people not only need to be continued to be heard in this conversation, but autistic people and our families need to be listened to, and not only listened to, but our priorities actioned upon, because that is the only way we will ensure that we will move forward and not backward in the coming years ahead.
Thank you so much, Adam. And now I will give the floor to Ima, and I'm sorry because I've been told we only have a few minutes, 3-4 minutes to close. So, sorry, Ima, thank you for your patience.
Okay, thank you very much, even when I have no time to share with you what I had prepared. I want to start thanking all the participants and all the testimonies for the rich inputs and ideas, and pointing to what needs to be done and what barriers are still in society, which there are many. I would like to summarize some of the points, because I think one of the key issues have already, many of the key issues have already been mentioned in terms of the need to address autism from a human rights-based approach, to better understand our needs, to participate in research, to remove barriers in society. So I would like to then use a couple of minutes, and tell me how many, because I will synthesize to the minutes that you give me. My message. 1 minute. Okay. So in 1 minute there is very little I can say, but to tell that we are going to have many opportunities in the preparation of the new phase of the strategy in terms of reflecting on actions and new initiatives. My call to you is to tell you that the way in which European policy is being made is highly based on consultations. Often, I find myself talking to my colleagues, raising issues as you have raised today, because in the public consultations, these issues are not raised. Things that are not raised do not exist. So I really think that you need to strengthen the visibility, strengthen all those very good ideas and all those reflections that you have shared today, transmit them to the Commission. And the way of doing that is through the responses to the public consultations. Make it visible, and I think you can be helped by your European organization. In Europe, we cannot do many of the things you have mentioned. It's not an excuse from the Commission, and are matters that need to be addressed, that are addressed at national level. And this is essential to understand, because we can support, we can help, but that responsibility, those services are organized at national level. Nevertheless, in the EU policy making, we work with member states. And the fact that you talk with your representatives at national level to transmit all that message, when we sit together with member states, when we sit together with Parliament, a lot has been said today about asking the Commission, but the reality is that the Commission makes a proposal, but the decision of the legislation, the allocation of money, soon we are going to be talking about the multi-annual financial framework, is not decided unilaterally by the Commission. So continue to talk to the Parliament, continue to talk to the Member States, so that when we sit together, they have also these views, and that we also would try to put forward. I wanted to say something more about the different initiatives, and you mentioned the European Accessibility Act. The Act contains requirements that are very relevant for persons with autism. Now we are developing the standards. How many of your organizations are there? You could be being there by participating as Ireland standardization organization. Any member state standardization organization has a delegation. There is a European delegation, so please, I know there is an issue with resources. I know there is an issue not only with financial resources, but with human resources. But only by making it visible and being present is possible to put these issues in the European agenda. There are going to be soon new developments in relation to the pillar of social rights, to the housing initiatives. So please do reply and make it that when we see the responses of the public, this issue is as present as it is here today. Because really is, in the 1 minute I'm giving, I cannot really say much more to that. Yeah, so I have to really summarize.